Half a year after my daughter vanished, her number texted again. The location pinged my late husband's office. Inside, one phone was still charging, with her last voicemail playing. At that moment, I realized, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The phone buzzed on my nightstand at exactly 11:47 p.m., jolting me from the restless half-sleep that had become my nightly companion. 6 months of this routine, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for morning to come so I could pretend to function like a normal person again. But this wasn't just any notification. This was from Aviana's number. My hands shook as I reached for the device, my 64-year-old fingers suddenly feeling ancient and clumsy. The screen glowed with impossible words. "Good night, Mom." I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating. Grief could do that to a person, I'd read somewhere. Make you see things that weren't there, hear voices that had been silenced forever. But when I opened my eyes again, the message remained. Time-stamped and real. 6 months. 6 months since my 32-year-old daughter had simply vanished from our lives like morning mist. No note, no goodbye, no explanation. One day she was there, helping me clean out Richard's study after his sudden heart attack, and the next she was gone. Her apartment untouched but empty of life. Her car found 3 weeks later in a mall parking lot 40 miles away. The police had their theories. Suicide, though they never found a body. Running away, though she'd left everything behind. Her passport, her credit cards, even the grandmother's ring she never took off. Foul play, though there were no signs of struggle, no enemies, no reason for anyone to hurt my gentle, quiet daughter. I had my own theory, one that kept me awake most nights. It was my fault. I'd been a terrible mother to Aviana. Oh, I provided for her physical needs well enough. Food, shelter, clothing, education. But emotional support? Understanding? The kind of deep, unconditional love that makes a child feel truly safe in the world? I'd failed her there, repeatedly and spectacularly. Richard had been the warm parent, the one who remembered her birthday parties and school plays. I'd been the distant one, always working, always stressed, always too busy managing our household finances and his medical practice to truly connect with our daughter. When she was little, she'd run to Daddy when she scraped her knee. When she was older, she'd confide in Daddy about boys and dreams and fears. And now Daddy was gone, and I was the only parent left. And apparently I'd done such a poor job that she'd rather disappear than turn to me for help. The message had a location attached. I clicked on it with trembling fingers, and my breath caught in my throat. The GPS coordinates led to Richard's old office building downtown, the medical complex where he'd practiced cardiology for 32 years until his death 7 months ago. Why would her phone be there? The building had been mostly empty since the practice closed. I'd been meaning to clean out his office, but every time I thought about facing his desk, his diplomas, his patient files, I'd find an excuse to postpone. Too painful, too final, but if Aviana's phone was there, if somehow she was there, I was out of bed and pulling on clothes before I'd fully processed the decision. My neighbors would think I'd lost my mind, driving across town at midnight to chase what was probably a cruel prank or a technical glitch. Maybe they'd be right. Maybe grief had finally broken something essential in my brain. But what if they were wrong? What if my daughter needed me? The drive through empty streets gave me too much time to think. 25 minutes of replaying every conversation Aviana and I had shared in her final weeks, searching for clues I'd missed. She'd seemed quieter than usual after Richard's funeral, more withdrawn. But I'd attributed that to grief. We were all struggling to adjust to life without him. Had she been trying to tell me something? Had I been too wrapped up in my own pain to notice hers? The medical complex loomed dark against the night sky, only a few security lights breaking the shadows. I parked in the empty lot and sat for a moment, gathering courage. The building manager had given me keys months ago, insisting I take my time cleaning out Richard's space. Such a kind gesture that I'd repaid with procrastination and avoidance. My footsteps echoed in the marble lobby as I made my way to the elevators. 5th floor, suite 503. Dr. Richard Martinez, cardiology. The nameplate was still there, I noticed as I approached the familiar door. No one had bothered to remove it yet. The key turned easily in the lock, and I stepped into darkness thick with the smell of dust and abandonment. My fingers found the light switch from muscle memory. How many times had I visited Richard here over the years, bringing him lunch or picking him up for dinner dates? The reception area looked exactly as it had the day after his funeral when I'd locked it up. Sarah's desk still held her coffee mug and a small succulent plant that had long since withered. Patient charts were stacked neatly in their proper places, everything waiting patiently for a doctor who would never return. But there was something different. A faint glow coming from beneath the door to Richard's private office. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached. The door was slightly ajar, which was wrong. I always locked everything securely. I pushed it open with the tips of my fingers, afraid of what I might find. There, on Richard's old mahogany desk, sat a phone charging cable plugged into the wall outlet, and connected to it was a device I recognized immediately, Aviana's rose gold iPhone with its cracked screen protector that she'd refused to replace because it had sentimental value. The phone was alive, its screen cycling through notifications and messages. 6 months' worth of worried texts from friends, missed calls from me, automatic reminders, and updates from apps she'd never deleted. A digital ghost of my daughter's life, somehow still breathing in this tomb of my husband's career. I sank into Richard's leather chair, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. This was impossible. If her phone had been here all along, why hadn't the police found it during their initial search? Why would Aviana have brought it here in the first place? And then I noticed something else that made my blood run cold. Next to the charging phone, partially hidden beneath some of Richard's old medical journals, was the corner of what looked like a notebook. A notebook with a cover I recognized, the leather-bound diary I'd given Aviana for her 30th birthday, the one she'd been writing in constantly during those final weeks before she disappeared. My hands moved without conscious thought, pulling the journal from its hiding place. It fell open to a page filled with Aviana's familiar handwriting, and the first words I read made me understand that everything I thought I knew about my husband, my daughter, and my family was about to crumble into dust. The handwriting was unmistakably Aviana's, those careful, rounded letters she'd perfected in 4th grade and never changed. But the words themselves belonged to a stranger, someone filled with pain and confusion I'd never suspected existed. I can't believe I'm writing this, but I have to document everything in case something happens to me. Mom doesn't know. She can't know. It would destroy what little peace she has left after losing Dad. But I can't carry this secret alone anymore. My hands trembled as I turned the page, afraid of what I might discover, but unable to stop reading. The journal was dated just 2 weeks before Aviana's disappearance. Found the key to Dad's filing cabinet today while Mom was at the grocery store. She's been putting off cleaning his office, and I thought I'd help by organizing his patient files for storage. That's when I found the folder marked Personal Private. I should have left it alone. God, I wish I had left it alone. A chill ran down my spine. Richard had always been secretive about his personal files, claiming doctor-patient confidentiality even when I tease him about his locked drawers. I had respected his privacy, trusted his professionalism. Now I wondered what else I'd been blind to. The folder was full of bank statements, legal documents, photographs, but not the kind of photographs that should be in a doctor's office. Pictures of another woman, another family. Dad had a whole other life, Mom. A wife named Margaret living in Riverside, 2 kids, a boy who looks exactly like him and a girl who can't be more than 16. The room seemed to spin around me. I gripped the edge of Richard's desk, fighting nausea that had nothing to do with the late hour. Another wife? Other children? 35 years of marriage, and I'd never suspected anything. How could I have been so naive? I confronted Dad about it 3 days before he died. He broke down completely, said it started as an affair 20 years ago, but became something more when Margaret got pregnant. He'd been supporting them financially ever since, telling me it was money for continuing education or practice improvements. All those conferences he attended, all those weekend emergencies at the hospital, he was with them. 20 years. Aviana had known about this betrayal for only days before Richard's death, carrying this devastating secret while planning his funeral, comforting me through my grief. How had she managed to smile at the memorial service, to hold my hand while I sobbed over the casket of a man who'd been lying to us both for decades? Dad begged me not to tell Mom, said it would serve no purpose now, that Margaret and her children deserved to continue their lives without scandal. He made me promise to let him handle it after his recovery. But then he had the heart attack at the office, and suddenly I was the only one who knew the truth. I could picture that conversation. Richard's face pale with shame and fear, Aviana's world crashing down around her. No wonder she'd seemed distant in those final weeks. She'd been processing not just the loss of her father, but the destruction of everything she'd believed about her family. Margaret called me yesterday. Somehow Shay found out about Dad's death and tracked down my number. She wants to talk, says she has a right to know about the will, about his assets. She thinks I told Mom about their family and that we're planning to cut her off financially. When I told her Mom doesn't know anything, she laughed. Said that was convenient for us. My blood ran cold. This Margaret person was still out there, still making demands. Had she been pressuring Aviana? Threatening her somehow? The next entry was dated just 3 days before Aviana's disappearance, and her handwriting looked shaky, rushed. Margaret is escalating. She called again today, said if I don't convince Mom to continue Dad's payments, $1,200 a month apparently, she'll show up at our house with all the proof. Photos, love letters, legal documents showing Dad claimed her children as dependents. She says she'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man he really was. $1,200 a month. I did quick mental math. Over $15,000 a year for 20 years. $300,000 that should have been saved for our retirement for Aviana's future, gone to support a family I didn't even know existed. I can't let her hurt Mom like that. Mom's been through enough pain. But I also can't keep paying Margaret without telling Mom why. The practice accounts will be closed soon, and she'll notice if I start transferring money from our joint accounts. I feel trapped between protecting Mom from the truth and protecting her from Margaret's threats. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that made my heart ache for my daughter. She'd been caught in an impossible situation, trying to shield me from a truth that would devastate me while dealing with what amounted to blackmail from Richard's other family. The final entry was written in Aviana's careful block letters, as if she'd forced herself to slow down, to think clearly about each word. I've made a decision. I can't tell Mom the truth. It would destroy her faith in Dad, in their marriage, in everything she believes about our family. But I also can't let Margaret continue making threats. So I'm going to disappear for a while. Let Margaret think I've abandoned Mom completely. Maybe she'll leave us both alone if she believes there's no one left to extort. I've been setting up a new identity, transferring some of my savings to accounts Margaret can't trace. I'll find work somewhere far away, wait until she gives up or finds another source of income. It might take months, maybe years, but it's the only way to protect Mom without destroying her completely. If something happens to me, if Margaret decides to come after me, all the evidence is here in Dad's office. I've hidden copies of everything. The photos, the bank records, the threatening voicemails from Margaret. I've also programmed my phone to send automatic messages on a timer, so Mom will know where to find this information if I can't come back to tell her myself. The phone on the desk suddenly buzzed with another notification, making me jump. The screen lit up with a reminder that had been set months ago. Tell Mom the truth. She deserves to know. Tears blurred my vision as I understood what my daughter had done. She'd sacrificed her own freedom, her own life, to protect me from a truth she thought would break me. She'd been sending those automated messages as breadcrumbs, hoping I'd eventually follow them here to find the evidence she'd left behind. But Margaret was still out there somewhere, probably wondering why the money had stopped flowing after Richard's death. And if she'd been threatening Aviana before, I needed to find my daughter before Margaret did. I spent the rest of the night in Richard's office, methodically going through every file, every document that Aviana had mentioned in her journal. What I found painted a picture of deception so elaborate, so carefully maintained, that I wondered if I'd ever truly known my husband at all. The filing cabinet that had required a key held folder after folder of evidence. Bank statements showing regular transfers to an account under Margaret Thompson's name. Credit card bills for restaurants I'd never been to, hotels and cities Richard had supposedly visited for medical conferences, insurance policies listing dependents I'd never heard of: Marcus Thompson, age 19, and Lisa Thompson, age 16. But it was the photographs that hit me hardest. Dozens of them, spanning 2 decades. Richard at birthday parties, Christmas mornings, graduations, all with a family that wasn't ours. His arm around a woman with auburn hair and kind eyes, who wore his smile in a way that suggested intimate familiarity. Children who had his dark eyes, his stubborn chin, his way of tilting their head when they were thinking. In one photo, Richard was teaching the boy, Marcus, how to tie a necktie, the same patient expression on his face that I remembered from when he taught Aviana to ride a bicycle. In another, he was walking the girl, Lisa, down what looked like a school hallway, probably for a father-daughter dance or graduation ceremony. These weren't the photos of an affair. These were family moments captured with the same care and love that filled our own photo albums at home. Richard hadn't just been cheating on me, he'd been living a completely parallel life. The most devastating discovery was a stack of love letters, written in Richard's familiar handwriting. Letters to Margaret that spoke of a deep, genuine affection spanning decades. In one, dated just 6 months before his death, he'd written, "I know this situation isn't fair to anyone, especially Rosalind, but I can't imagine my life without you and the kids. You've given me a joy I never knew was possible." I had to set that letter down and walk to the window, fighting the urge to vomit. 35 years of marriage, and apparently I'd been the obligation while Margaret had been his true love. Every kiss, every anniversary dinner, every time he told me he loved me, had it all been a lie? Or had he somehow convinced himself he could love 2 families simultaneously? My phone rang, startling me from these dark thoughts. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a Riverside area code. My heart hammered as I realized what this might mean. "Hello?" I answered, my voice hoarse from crying. "Is this Rosalind Martinez?" The voice was female, mature, with a slight southern accent. "Yes, this is Rosalind." A pause. Then, "This is Margaret Thompson. I think we need to talk." The bottom of my stomach dropped out. After 20 years of existing in the shadows of my marriage, Richard's other wife was finally reaching out directly. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, but I knew this conversation was inevitable. "I suppose we do," I managed. "I know this must be difficult for you," Margaret said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice. "I never wanted you to find out this way. Richard always said he would tell you himself when the time was right." When would that have been exactly? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. After another 20 years? After I was too old to rebuild my life? Margaret sighed. "I understand your anger. I've been angry too, if it helps. Angry at Richard for putting us all in this impossible situation. Angry at myself for accepting it for so long." "Why are you calling me now?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Because your daughter stopped responding to my messages 6 months ago, and the monthly support payment stopped coming. Marcus is trying to finish his last year of college, and Lisa needs money for her car insurance, her school expenses. I know Richard set aside funds specifically for their education, but I can't access them without my cooperation," I finished. "I'm not trying to take anything that belongs to you," Margaret said quickly, "but Richard promised these children he would support them through college. Lisa wants to be a veterinarian just like her father always encouraged her to be. Marcus is studying engineering because Richard said he had the mind for it. They don't deserve to have their futures destroyed because of adult mistakes." Her words hit me like physical blows. Richard had been actively parenting these children, supporting their dreams, helping shape their futures. Meanwhile, Apiana had often complained that her father seemed distracted during her own college years, that he'd missed several important milestones because of work commitments that apparently hadn't been work at all. "Where is my daughter?" I asked, cutting straight to what mattered most. "What did you do to her?" Margaret's voice sharpened. "I didn't do anything to Oviana. I asked her to help facilitate the continued support payments, and she told me she needed time to figure out how to handle the situation. That was the last time I spoke to her. Aviana's journal says you threatened her, that you said you'd expose Richard publicly if she didn't pay you. A long silence. Then Margaret said quietly, I was desperate. The life insurance policies Richard had for my children were tied up in probate because he'd never legally acknowledged them. I had no other way to access the money he'd promised them. I may have pressured Aviana more than I should have. You mean you blackmailed her? I mean, I was trying to protect my children's futures the only way I knew how. Richard had been their father in every way that mattered except legally. They'd lost him too, but they didn't even get to attend his funeral or grieve publicly. All they had left were his promises of support, and those promises died with him unless someone helped me access the accounts. Despite my anger, I found myself feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy. Margaret's children had lost their father too, but they had to mourn in secret, pretending he meant nothing to them. In some ways, their situation was even worse than mine. I need to find Aviana, I said. She's been missing for 6 months because she was trying to protect me from this truth. If you know anything about where she might have gone... I don't, Margaret said, and I believed her. But I think I know someone who might. Who? Richard's lawyer, David Brennan. He helped Richard set up some of the financial arrangements for my family. If Aviana was trying to disappear, she might have contacted him for legal advice about identity changes or asset transfers. David Brennan. I knew the name. He'd handled Richard's will and the transfer of the medical practice after his death, but he'd never mentioned anything about Richard having other financial obligations or beneficiaries. Did he know about you all along? I asked. Yes. He was the one who helped Richard establish the separate accounts, set up the insurance policies. He also knew that Richard intended to eventually tell you the truth and make everything legal and above board. When? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Margaret hesitated. Richard always said he was waiting for the right time. First, he wanted to wait until Aviana finished college. Then, until she got established in her career. Then, until you two were closer to retirement and could handle the emotional upheaval better. There was always another reason to wait. In other words, never. Richard had been content to live this double life indefinitely, taking the coward's way out by letting death make the decision for him. I'll contact David Brennan, I said, but I need something from you in return. What? Everything. Every letter, every photo, every document that proves this relationship existed. If I'm going to find my daughter and figure out how to handle this situation, I need to understand the full scope of what Richard was hiding. All right, Margaret agreed. I'll gather everything and meet you somewhere. But Rosalind, when you find Aviana, please tell her I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to hurt her. I was just trying to take care of my children the way any mother would. After we hung up, I sat in Richard's chair and tried to process everything I'd learned. My husband had been living a double life for 20 years. My daughter had disappeared trying to protect me from a truth she thought would destroy me. And somewhere out there, Aviana was hiding, probably scared and alone, still carrying the burden of secrets that were never hers to bear. But now I knew the truth, and the truth, however painful, was something I could work with. Margaret wasn't the villain in this story. We were both victims of Richard's deception. And if we worked together instead of against each other, maybe we could find Aviana and bring her home. The first step was David Brennan. If he'd helped Richard maintain his deception, maybe he'd also helped my daughter disappear. And if so, he was going to help me find her, whether he wanted to or not. David Brennan's law office occupied the top floor of a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel that reflected the morning sun like mirrors. I'd been here before, of course, for Richard's will reading, for the paperwork transferring his practice assets, for all the mundane legal details that follow a death. But I'd never come here as a woman who discovered her entire marriage had been built on lies. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, looked up with practiced professional warmth. Mrs. Martinez, how nice to see you again. Mr. Brennan is expecting you. I'd called that morning, my voice steady despite the rage churning in my stomach. David, this is Rosalind Martinez. I need to see you today about some irregularities I've discovered in Richard's financial records. I kept it vague, professional. No need to alert him that I knew exactly how deep his complicity ran. David's corner office commanded an impressive view of the city, but today the panorama felt like a cruel reminder of how small my world had become, how much I'd missed while focusing on my narrow slice of reality. Rosalind. David stood as I entered, extending his hand with the same warm smile he'd worn at Richard's funeral. Please sit down. You sounded upset on the phone. How can I help? David Brennan was a handsome man in his early 50s, silver-haired and distinguished in the way that inspired confidence in clients who needed someone to handle their most sensitive affairs. He'd been Richard's friend since medical school, the best man at our wedding, a regular guest at our dinner parties. If anyone should have felt obligated to protect me from Richard's deception, it should have been David. I settled into the leather chair across from his mahogany desk and placed a manila folder in front of me. Inside were copies of the bank statements and photographs I'd found in Richard's office, along with printed copies of the threatening text messages Margaret had sent to Aviana's phone. I've discovered some interesting documents in Richard's private files, I said, my tone conversational. I thought you might be able to help me understand them. I opened the folder and slid the first bank statement across his desk. David's eyes flicked to the paper, and I watched his face carefully. The practiced smile faltered for just a moment, less than a second, but long enough to confirm what I already suspected. This appears to be a routine financial document, he said, but his voice had lost some of its warmth. Richard had several accounts for different purposes: practice expenses, investments, retirement savings. This particular account shows monthly transfers of $1,200 to someone named Margaret Thompson. I continued, sliding another statement across the desk. For 20 years. That's almost $300,000, David. Money that should have been saved for our retirement. David set the papers down and leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. Rosalind, if you're having concerns about Richard's financial management, I'd be happy to refer you to a forensic accountant who could review everything more thoroughly. I almost smiled at his attempt to deflect. Did he really think I was some naive widow who could be brushed off with professional referrals? I don't need a forensic accountant, I said, pulling out one of the photographs. I need you to tell me how long you've known about Richard's second family. The photo showed Richard at what appeared to be a high school graduation, his arm around a teenage girl in a cap and gown. The resemblance between them was unmistakable. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin that I'd fallen in love with 36 years ago. David's face went pale. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, then slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. How did you find these? Does it matter? I kept my voice steady, though inside I was screaming. What matters is that you've known about Margaret and her children all along, and you never said a word. Not during the will reading, not when I was struggling with grief, not when I was wondering why Richard's finances seemed more complicated than they should have been. David stood and walked to his window, his back to me. Richard swore me to attorney-client privilege. I couldn't. Don't. The sharpness in my voice surprised both of us. Don't hide behind legal technicalities. You were supposed to be our friend, David. You held my hand at Richard's funeral. You told me what a good man he was, how much he loved me, all while knowing he'd been living a lie for 20 years. He turned back to face me, and for the first time since I'd known him, David Brennan looked uncomfortable. It wasn't my place to tell you, Rosalind. Richard always intended to handle it himself. When? I stood as well, moving closer to his desk. When exactly was Richard planning to tell me that he had another wife and 2 children? After I was too old to leave him? After I'd wasted my entire life being faithful to a man who was giving his heart to someone else? David's jaw tightened. Richard loved you. His relationship with Margaret didn't change that. It changed everything, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Every anniversary we celebrated was a mockery. Every time he told me he loved me, he was thinking about another woman. Every Christmas morning, every vacation, every quiet evening at home, he was wishing he was somewhere else with his real family. That's not. Where is my daughter? I cut him off, stepping closer to his desk. Aviana discovered Richard's secret and disappeared 6 months ago. Margaret Thompson has been calling her, pressuring her to continue the payments Richard was making. My daughter's hiding somewhere because she was trying to protect me from this truth, and I think you know where she is." David returned to his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 53 years. "I can't discuss anything related to Aviana without her permission. So you have been in contact with her." The relief was almost overwhelming. If David knew where Aviana was, that meant she was alive. After 6 months of fearing the worst, that knowledge alone was worth this confrontation. "I didn't say that." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshot of the text message that had started all of this. This message came from Aviana's phone 2 nights ago. It led me to Richard's office, where she'd hidden all the evidence of his double life. "She's been sending these automated messages, David. She wants me to find the truth." David stared at the phone screen, his expression unreadable. "Even if I had been in contact with your daughter, which I'm not confirming, I couldn't violate her confidentiality any more than I could violate Richard's." "Richard is dead," I said flatly, "and my daughter is missing. At what point does your professional obligation to a dead man become less important than helping a living woman find her child?" For several long moments we stared at each other across his desk. I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face, loyalty to Richard warring with whatever conscience he had left. Finally, he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "There's a private investigator I sometimes work with. Very discreet, very thorough. If someone wanted to disappear completely, create a new identity, this would be the person they'd contact." He slid the card across the desk. "Sarah Chen, Private Investigations. A local address and phone number." "I'm not saying Oviana contacted her," David said carefully. "But if someone with her circumstances needed to vanish without a trace, Sarah would be able to help them do it safely." I picked up the card, studying the simple black text. "And if I wanted to find someone who had disappeared, could she help with that too?" "Sarah is very good at finding people who don't want to be found," David said, "but she's also very good at respecting her clients' wishes. If someone hired her to help them disappear, she wouldn't betray that confidence easily." "What would it take?" I asked. "Hypothetically." David leaned forward, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Evidence that the person who disappeared was in danger. Proof that they were being threatened or coerced. Sarah won't help someone hide from the law, but she'll absolutely help someone hide from a dangerous situation." I thought about Margaret's threatening text messages, her demands for money, her pressure on Aviana to keep paying or face public exposure. That constituted coercion, didn't it? "Thank you," I said, standing and gathering my papers. "You've been very helpful." "Rosalind," David called as I reached the door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About all of it. Richard put us all in an impossible situation." I turned back to look at him, this man who'd sat at my dinner table for years while keeping my husband's secrets. "No, David. Richard put himself in an impossible situation. The rest of you just chose to enable him instead of doing the right thing." "And what would the right thing have been?" he asked. "Destroying your marriage? Devastating you? With a truth you were happier not knowing?" "The right thing," I said slowly, "would have been helping me make an informed choice about my own life. Instead, you all decided I was too fragile to handle the truth. Well, congratulations. Your protection drove my daughter into hiding, and now I'm going to do whatever it takes to bring her home." I left his office with Sarah Chen's business card in my hand and a new understanding of just how many people had conspired to keep me in the dark. But I also left with something else. Hope. If David was right, if Oviana had contacted this private investigator, then she was alive and she was being smart about staying safe. Now I just had to convince Sarah Chen to help me find her. Sarah Chen's office was nothing like David Brennan's polished corporate suite. Located in a converted warehouse in an older part of town, it felt more like a detective's workspace from an old movie. Cluttered desk, filing cabinets that had seen better days, and a coffee maker that looked like it had been brewing the same pot since the 1990s. Sarah herself was equally no nonsense. A woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. "So let me understand this correctly," she said when I finished. "Your daughter discovered your husband's 20-year affair and second family, was being pressured by the other woman to continue financial support, and disappeared rather than burden you with the truth. And you believe she may have contacted me for help creating a new identity." "That's right." I slid copies of Margaret's threatening text messages across her desk. David Brennan suggested that if someone in Aviana's situation needed to disappear safely, you'd be the person they'd contact. Sarah studied the messages, her expression unreadable. "These constitute clear evidence of financial coercion. Your daughter had legitimate reasons to fear this Margaret Thompson." "Then you'll help me find her?" Sarah set the papers down and leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to be completely honest with you. If your daughter did contact me, and I'm not confirming that she did, it would have been because she felt she had no other choice. She believed she was protecting you from something that would cause you tremendous pain." "She was wrong," I said firmly. "The pain of not knowing where she is, of wondering if she's safe, of thinking she might be dead, that's worse than any truth about Richard could ever be." Sarah studied my face for a long moment. "You're certain about that?" "Because once you know where she is, there's no going back. Your daughter made significant sacrifices to keep this information from you." "I'm certain." I met her gaze steadily. "I want my daughter back, whatever the cost." Sarah opened a desk drawer and pulled out a file folder. "Aviana contacted me 7 months ago, about 2 weeks after your husband's death. She was terrified, Mrs. Martinez, not just of Margaret Thompson's threats, but of what the truth would do to you." 7 months ago? That meant Aviana had been planning her disappearance almost immediately after Richard's funeral, while I was still deep in grief and completely unaware that my world was about to crumble even further. "She showed me everything," Sarah continued. "The photographs, the bank records, the threatening messages. She was convinced that if Margaret followed through on her threats to expose your husband publicly, it would destroy you completely." "Where is she?" I asked, my heart pounding. Sarah hesitated. "Before I answer that, I need you to understand something. Your daughter didn't just disappear, Mrs. Martinez. She died." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean she died?" "Legally speaking, Aviana Martinez died in a car accident in Nevada 6 months ago. The woman who survived that accident was someone else entirely. Someone with a new name, new social security number, new history. Someone who could start fresh without the burden of Richard's secrets or Margaret's threats. You helped her fake her own death?" I was struggling to process this information. "I helped her escape a dangerous situation," Sarah corrected. "The car accident was real. She was driving through Nevada when she hit black ice and went off the road. The car was totaled, but she walked away with minor injuries. When the police couldn't immediately identify her because her ID had been destroyed in the crash, she saw an opportunity." Sarah opened the file folder and showed me official-looking documents. "I have contacts in certain government agencies, people who understand that sometimes good people need to disappear for legitimate reasons. Aviana's situation qualified." "But why didn't she trust me with the truth?" The question that had been haunting me for months finally found voice. Why did she think she had to protect me from this? Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Because she'd watched you grieve for a man you thought was devoted to you. She'd seen how much comfort you took in believing that Richard had been faithful, that your marriage had been real and meaningful. She couldn't bear the thought of taking that away from you." "But it was all a lie," I said, my voice breaking. 35 years of my life built on lies." "Was it?" Sarah asked gently. "From what Aviana told me, Richard did love you. He was weak and selfish and made terrible choices, but his feelings for you were genuine. His mistake was thinking he could have both families without hurting anyone." I thought about the love letters I'd found in Richard's office, the ones where he'd written about not being able to imagine his life without Margaret. He loved her more than me. Maybe. Or maybe he loved you differently. But Aviana didn't want you to spend your remaining years torturing yourself with those questions. She wanted you to remember the good parts of your marriage and find peace. "And what about her peace?" I demanded. "What about her life, her future? She gave up everything to protect me from a truth I was strong enough to handle." Sarah nodded slowly. Which is why I'm going to tell you where she is. Because you've proven that you can handle the truth, and because your daughter deserves to know that. She pulled out another sheet of paper and wrote down an address. She's in Oregon, working as a nurse at a small rural hospital. She chose nursing because it felt like starting over, using her skills to help people without any connection to her previous life. I stared at the address, my hands trembling. After 6 months of not knowing if my daughter was alive or dead, I finally had a way to find her. What name is she using? I asked. Emma Patterson. She's been very careful, Mrs. Martinez. No social media, no contact with anyone from her previous life. She's been sending those automated text messages from her old phone to make sure you'd eventually find the truth, but she hasn't been receiving any responses. She doesn't know that I know about Richard and Margaret? No. As far as she's aware, you still believe your husband was faithful. She's been living with the guilt of keeping that secret, plus the pain of being separated from you. I stood up, already reaching for my purse. I need to go to her immediately. Mrs. Martinez, Sarah said gently, before you do that, I think you should consider how you want to approach this. Your daughter has built a new life based on the belief that she was protecting you. Finding out that her sacrifice was unnecessary might be difficult for her to process. I thought about this for a moment. Aviana had given up her name, her career, her entire identity to keep me from learning about Richard's betrayal. How would she feel when she discovered that not only did I know the truth, but I was handling it better than she'd expected? What do you suggest? I asked. Go slowly. Let her know you've discovered Richard's secret and that you want to rebuild your relationship based on honesty. Give her time to process the fact that her sacrifice wasn't necessary, and be prepared for the possibility that she might be angry at Richard, at the situation, maybe even at you for being stronger than she thought you were. I nodded, understanding the wisdom in Sarah's advice. After everything Aviana had been through, the last thing I wanted was to overwhelm her with my sudden appearance. I'll drive to Oregon tomorrow, I decided, but I won't ambush her. I'll call first, let her know I'm coming. Sarah handed me another piece of paper. This is her phone number, the one she's been using as Emma Patterson. Mrs. Martinez. When you call her, please tell her I said hello. Your daughter's a remarkable woman. She sacrificed everything to protect someone she loved, and not many people would have that kind of courage. As I left Sarah's office, I felt a mixture of relief, excitement, and apprehension. I was going to see my daughter again, but the woman I met in Oregon wouldn't be the same Aviana who had disappeared 6 months ago. She'd been through an ordeal that had forced her to reinvent herself completely. The question was, could we reinvent our relationship too? Could we build something honest and strong from the ashes of all the secrets and lies that had torn our family apart? Tomorrow, I would find out. The drive to Oregon took me through landscapes that seemed to mirror my emotional journey, from the familiar sprawl of Southern California through desert highways that stretched endlessly toward an uncertain horizon. I'd called the number Sarah had given me that morning, my hands shaking as I dialed. Hello? The voice was cautious and unfamiliar. 6 months of living under a different name had even changed the way Aviana answered her phone. Emma? I used the name Sarah had told me, not wanting to startle her. This is your mother. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Mom? Where are you? I'm in Los Angeles, but I'm driving to Oregon. I found your journal in Dad's office. I know everything, sweetheart. About Margaret, about the threats, about why you disappeared. We need to talk. Another long pause. Then, you know about Margaret? I know about all of it. The second family, the money, everything. And I know what you've sacrificed to protect me from the truth. I heard her crying then, soft sobs that broke my heart. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't let her hurt you with the truth about Dad. The only thing that hurt me was losing you, I said firmly. I'm coming to see you. We're going to figure this out together. Now, 12 hours later, I was pulling into the parking lot of Mercy General Hospital in the small Oregon town, where my daughter had been hiding. It was a modest facility, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. How had Aviana managed to blend in here? How had she convinced these people that she was Emma Patterson, a nurse with no family, no past? The receptionist at the information desk was a cheerful woman in her 60s who looked like she'd been working there since the hospital opened. "I'm looking for Emma Patterson," I said. "She's a nurse here." "Oh, Emma," the woman's face lit up. "Such a sweet girl. Always volunteers for extra shifts, never complains about anything. Are you family?" "Yes," I said, surprised by how easily the truth came. "I'm her mother." "Well, isn't that wonderful?" Emma never mentioned having family nearby. She's working the afternoon shift in the medical wing. 3rd floor, East Corridor. I took the elevator up, my heart pounding harder with each floor. What would I say to her? How do you greet a daughter who's been legally dead for 6 months? I found her at the nurse's station updating patient charts. She'd changed her appearance significantly. Her dark hair was now honey blonde and cut in a shorter style, and she'd lost weight, making her look younger somehow. But I would have recognized her anywhere. The way she held her pen, the little furrow between her eyebrows when she concentrated, these were the same mannerisms I'd watched since she was a child. "Emma?" I said softly. She looked up, and for a moment our eyes met across the busy hallway. The carefully constructed mask of her new identity slipped, and I saw my daughter's pain and relief and love all mixed together in her expression. "Mom," she whispered, standing slowly. "You really came." We met in the middle of the hallway, and I pulled her into a hug that 6 months of separation had made precious beyond measure. She felt smaller than I remembered, fragile in a way that spoke of the weight she'd been carrying alone. "I've missed you so much," I murmured into her hair, breathing in the familiar scent that no new identity could change. "I've missed you too." Her voice was muffled against my shoulder. "Every day. But I couldn't let Margaret destroy your memories of Dad." I pulled back to look at her face. "Sweetheart, what Margaret would have destroyed were my illusions about Dad. There's a difference. The memories I want to keep, the good times we had as a family, the love we shared, those were real regardless of what else he was doing." She searched my eyes, looking for signs of the devastation she'd expected this truth to cause. "But he betrayed you? For 20 years, he was living a double life. How can you be so calm about this?" I thought about how to explain the complex emotions I'd been processing over the past few days. "I'm not calm about it. I'm angry and hurt and confused, but I'm also 64 years old, and I've learned that life is too short to waste it on situations I can't change. Your father is gone. His choices are part of the past now, but you're here and you're alive, and that matters more to me than anything he did or didn't do." We found a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria to continue our conversation. Aviana, Emma, told me about her life in Oregon, about the friends she'd made who knew nothing about her real history, about the satisfaction she found in her work as a nurse. "It's been peaceful," she admitted. "Lonely, but peaceful. I didn't realize how much stress I was carrying until it was gone. No more worrying about Margaret's threats. No more keeping secrets from you. No more trying to figure out how to handle Dad's financial obligations." "What about Margaret?" I asked. "Have you heard from her since you disappeared?" Aviana shook her head. "Nothing. I think she assumed I'd abandoned you completely, so there was no point in continuing the threats." "I met with her," I said, watching my daughter's eyes widen in surprise. "She's not the villain in this story, sweetheart. She's just another woman who got caught up in your father's web of lies. Her children are struggling financially without the support he promised them." "You're going to help them?" Aviana asked, and I could hear both surprise and relief in her voice. "We're going to help them," I corrected. "Together. There's enough money in your father's estate to honor his commitments to Margaret's children without impoverishing us. It's the right thing to do." For the first time since I'd arrived, Aviana smiled. "You're amazing, Mom. I was so scared that learning the truth would break you, but you're handling this better than I ever imagined you could." "I'm handling it better because I don't have to handle it alone," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. That was your mistake, sweetheart. You tried to carry this burden by yourself instead of trusting that we could face it together. We talked for hours, filling in the gaps that 6 months of separation had created. I told her about the investigation, about finding her journal, about my conversations with Margaret and David Brennan and Sarah Chen. She told me about her new life, about the patients she'd helped, about the quiet satisfaction of working somewhere nobody knew her history. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "I can't just walk back into my old life. Emma Patterson has a job here, an apartment, a life. People would ask questions if she suddenly disappeared." I'd been thinking about this during the drive to Oregon. What if you didn't have to choose? What if Emma Patterson could gradually transition back to Aviana Martinez? You could request a transfer to a California hospital, close enough that you could visit, but far enough that we could start fresh. And Margaret? Her children? I'll set up a trust fund for Marcus and Lisa's education, managed by an independent trustee. Margaret won't have to worry about their college expenses, but she also won't have any control over the money. It'll be handled professionally without any personal involvement from either of us. Aviana nodded slowly. And us? Can we really start over after everything that's happened? I squeezed her hand. We're not starting over, sweetheart. We're starting fresh. There's a difference. Starting over would mean pretending the past 6 months never happened, pretending your father's secrets never existed. Starting fresh means acknowledging all of it and choosing to build something better. As evening fell, we walked through the small town where my daughter had been hiding. It was peaceful here, the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children played in the streets until dark. I could understand why she'd found solace in this simple life. "I need to give my notice at the hospital," she said as we sat on a bench in the town square, and figure out how to explain Emma Patterson's sudden departure without raising too many questions. "Sarah Chen can help with that," I suggested. "She seems to have experience with these kinds of transitions." Aviana was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mom, I want you to know that I don't regret what I did. If I had to do it again, knowing what I know now, I'd still try to protect you from the truth about Dad. And I want you to know that I would rather face any truth with you beside me than live in ignorance while you suffer alone," I replied. "Promise me something. No more secrets between us. No more trying to protect each other from difficult truths. We're stronger together than we are apart." "I promise," she said, and I believed her. 3 weeks later, Aviana Martinez, no longer Emma Patterson, started her new job at a hospital 2 hours north of Los Angeles. Close enough for regular visits, far enough for privacy. Margaret Thompson received notification that a trust fund had been established for her children's education, with no strings attached and no further contact required. David Brennan helped us liquidate some of Richard's assets to fund the trust, his way of making amends for his years of complicity. He never said so directly, but I think he was relieved to finally be free of the burden of Richard's secrets. On a Sunday evening 6 months after that first impossible text message, Aviana and I sat in my kitchen, cooking dinner together for the first time since before her disappearance. The conversation flowed easily now, without the weight of hidden truths. "Do you think Dad would approve of what we've done?" she asked as she chopped vegetables for our salad. I considered the question carefully. "I think your father spent 20 years trying to make everyone happy and ended up making everyone miserable instead. What we've done is honest. It might not make everyone happy, but at least it's real." "I like real," Aviana said, smiling. "It's messier than the alternative, but it's also more genuine." "Besides," I added, watching my daughter's face in the warm kitchen light, "the most important thing your father ever gave me was you. Everything else was just complicated." As we sat down to eat, I realized that this was what peace felt like. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of honesty. Not the elimination of pain, but the sharing of it. We'd lost Richard's illusions, but we'd gained something more valuable, a relationship built on truth instead of secrets. The phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment my heart jumped. Old habits from those months of hoping for word from Aviana. But this message was from Margaret Thompson. "Marcus got into veterinary school. Thank you for making his dreams possible." I showed the message to Aviana, who smiled and raised her glass of wine. To Dad, she said. He made terrible choices, but in the end, he brought us back together. To Dad, I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. And to the future, we're going to build without his secrets. Outside the kitchen window, the city lights stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibilities we were finally free to explore. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.